Daniel Boyarin is a Taubman Professor of Talmudic Culture in the departments of Near Eastern Studies and Rhetoric at the University of California, Berkeley. He has been, e.g., the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellow twice, a Guggenheim Fellow, a Fellow of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Jerusalem, a holder of the Berlin Prize at the American Academy of Berlin, a senior Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at the Freie Universität in Berlin, and a Ford Foundation Fellow. He's the author of many books, among them Dying for God, Martyrdom and the Making of Christianity in Judaism, The Jewish Gospels, The Story of the Jewish Christ, and A Radical Jew, Paul, and The Politics of Identity. And as I said, many other books. So please welcome our respondent, Daniel Boyarin.
Thank you. It's hard to say that I have an overall response, and maybe that's just as well. I want to start by saying that I deeply, deeply appreciate the interventions in the readings of that Jewish book that I refuse to call the New Testament. I think that some of the work, I mean, all of the work that I've heard from Dieter, from Daniel last week, from Daniel today, and has been rather thrilling in the sense of I sense a new paradigm developing. One specific comment that I would have made earlier, but ran out of time, is that Hebrews is a Yom Kippur liturgy. It is a reading of Yom Kippur. So it's hardly surprising that there is where we're going to find perhaps some innovative ideas about atonement, etc., because that's what the book is about. I strongly recommend Daniel Stickel Ben Ezra's book on Hebrews, who really, I think, clarifies that. The book of Hebrews itself is in some ways the most Jewy, by which I essentially mean rabbinic, of texts in the the Jewish Christian Testament. I'm at a loss what to call it at this point. In the sense of its close midrashic, its close similarities to midrashic readings, even point for point, especially, of course, the great midrash on I forget what the psalm is. Today, the psalm with the word today, which I've written about, in fact. Okay, that was just a particular comment. Coming for a moment in response to Kendall's absolutely stunning paper. It's like that's the one that I started feeling, why didn't I write that? Or to be really envious, I mean, of the brilliance of that paper. I think it's absolutely remarkable, absolutely compelling, absolutely correct. And you were asked something about implication. Well, I would say that one implication, and perhaps this is so obvious that you didn't need to say it, is that Jesus, in many verses, is being identified with the God of Israel, with Hashem. In other words, when it says something that comes out in English as Jesus is Lord, or Jesus is Kurios, right? That is, at least frequently, and the possibility ought to be considered in every case that this is a claim that Jesus is the God of Israel. Now, this is absolutely consistent with the Son of Man, right? The Son of Man in Daniel it has been shown and argued over and over that the one like a Son of Man in Daniel is absolutely a divine figure who comes riding on clouds. Right? There are 70 instances of riding on clouds in the whole Hebrew Bible, and every single one of them refers to the God of Israel, who is the rider on the clouds. So if we take that seriously, take seriously that there was a pre-Christian Jewish expectation of a divine figure that would be very human-like, and that's what I think Ben Adam, Son of Man, means, a human-like divine figure. Then if Jesus is claimed or claims himself to be the Son of Man, then it fits perfectly with the idea that kurios, in at least many places in the Bible of the Jesus folk, is actually claiming that Jesus is the Son of Man, is the God of Israel. So that's at least one very important, I think, scholarly outcome, and perhaps one of great significance, certainly for New Testament theologians, to take seriously. My friend and colleague Richard Hayes made this suggestion a number of years ago in my years that Jesus is actually being represented frequently as the God of Israel, and I think that Kendall's extraordinary paper will open up some serious exegetical roads and lines along that direction. My general and final comment, and this relates more to the conference as a whole, which is, I suppose, what you're hoping for and expecting from me. What I think we need is some more clarity on what we mean precisely by supersessionism. And I want to make some suggestion, and I'm not saying that anybody here would necessarily disagree with this, but I don't think it's been articulated as clearly and sharply as it might be. And this, I think, will help in proper appreciation of Dieter's paper, for instance. I think what I'm saying is implicit in your paper and could be more sharply articulated. It is not supersessionism or even a claim of supersession to argue or suggest, or for the Jesus folk in the first century to argue or suggest that they have the right interpretation of Scripture and of God's will, and that other Jews, and I emphasize that, other Jews who reject their interpretation are wrong. That is not supersession. That is the first century. The Qumranites are as harsh on the Pharisees, call them names, as anything that we find in the Gospels. for sure. And the rabbis are as hard on the Sadducees and the Boythians and people of that sort. I'll repeat again something I might have said last week. People say to me, how can I say that the Johannine Jesus is a Jew when he says, you are of your father, the devil? I say, because he's a Jew, he is not addressing the Jewish people when he says that. He's addressing a group of Jews with whom he has very sharp and serious and sincere disagreement, right? And Jews, as you know, tend to be like other people, only more so. So sometimes our conversations among ourselves are hysterical, over the top, right? But these are arguments among Jews, between Jewish groups, as to the legitimacy of representing interpretation of the Torah. I think Mark 7, as I hope will be acknowledged by many, has been successfully reread by a group of scholars in the last few years as being very much part of an inner Jewish controversy, and not which asserts Jesus' allegiance to the Torah and not his rejection of the Torah. He thinks it's the Pharisees who have been rejecting the Torah, and then the whole text makes perfectly good sense. Supersessionism is some version of a doctrine that God decided to punish the Jews for iniquity, rejected them, rejected his own Torah as useless, and sent Jesus to found a new chosen people, a completely new chosen people. And once we make that distinction clear, and again, I'm not filling in details, and I'm speaking very crudely in that distinction, then, for instance, Dieter's paper comes into very clear focus. There is absolutely no supersession in God saying, listen to Jesus. First of all, arguably, I think it's most plausible to say that Moses and Eliyahu, Moshe and Eliyahu, are brought there to confer authority on Jesus. I mean, if you're not in any sense Marcionite, right? And Jesus is being added to the list. It's not listen to Jesus and don't listen to Moses. I'm just agreeing with you, Dieter, here, and trying to make clear the distinction you made, right? It's listen to Jesus as if, or as you had formerly listened to Moses and Eliyahu, but add him to the list, not him. And when we make those distinctions clearer, and this is a service we can perhaps perform as a community in this Zoom of theologians and philologians, right? When we make these distinctions clearer, then it is possible, more possible, for devout Christians to feel that they can hang on to their traditions while rejecting the most or the pernicious aspects that disturb them so much. And I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. We do have a few minutes, so I suggest that we open it for questions and comments once again. And this time it could be to old papers, I suggest, those that were read today and last week as well, as we are approaching the end of the conference.
I see Dieter's hand, Jesper.
Yes, please.
Thanks. If I just may briefly, Daniel, I very much appreciate what you said, and of course, just wanted to maybe point out one point. You know, my presentation came out of a longer article in which I talk a little bit more about these things, and I think you're absolutely right. And in the longer version, I refer to a previous publication where I talk about prophets, priests, and kings and these figures in Marcion's Gospel and Luke. And what I say about the Transfiguration account is I am convinced that Luke has Moses and Elijah here not to bring them into conflict with Jesus, which is how Marcion reads it, but to bring the figures into contact. It's not conflict, it's contact. And I think that's exactly the point that you are making. And I would just want to underscore that what Luke in no way views this as something that is removing Moses and Elijah from the equation, but bringing Jesus into it, bringing these figures into contact for this community.
Thank you. More comments and questions?
Daniel Litchi has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question for Daniel. I really like your framing here, and you're reminding that there's nothing supersessionist about Jewish groups in the first century or any century debating with each other and accusing other groups of not having the correct interpretation of Judaism. I wonder if you think that the situation has changed in early Christianity when very, very early in the movement, instead of debates happening between two Jewish groups, we're going to very, very quickly have debates between Gentiles. Gentiles saying, we have the correct interpretation of Judaism. I wonder if you see that as significantly different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the founding figures of the nasty versions of supersessionism, the kinds that really demonize the Jews as the entire group of Jews, are first of all Melito of Sardis, right? The first poet of deicide. He's called, and Justin Martyr plays his part also. So there's the significant shift that takes place when it's not a conversation between Jews and Jews, or an argument between Jews and Jews, or a shouting match between Jews and Jews, and which makes it impossible to read it as being about the Jews. I mean, this is why, for instance, Daniel Jocelyn's paper last week is so convincing. It sounds to people think that these kinds of arguments are apologetic, that it's about the leaders, or it's about the Pharisees, or it's about the Jerusalemites. That those are not difficult or strained or forced interpretations a priori. These are Jews, as what did Paula Fredrickson say? It's a shouting match among Jews, right? It just has an entirely different um, uh, takes when it becomes Gentile authors who are from a subject position outside of the Jews, whatever I'm writing a book now called "What Is the Jews," in which I'm trying to get some sort of a sense of what we're talking about. But and look, and then you are of your father the devil becomes a Jesus who doesn't identify with Jews, saying something up to Jews and about Jews, right? And it's it's understandable. I'm not demonizing in turn, but at least trying not to. But I do think that is the most significant shift that gives rise to supersessionism in the way that I've defined it as a doctrine that God finally found the people of Israel wanting and evil and said, I tried with you guys, you're no good, goodbye, right? I'm going to find somebody else who's better, which has had the most pernicious effect. So yes, absolutely. And then, as I said last week, maybe very briefly, but I'm going to say once again, by definition, the collection of books, how did Kendall define it? The Jewish collection of books about Jesus, right? It cannot be supersessionist because it's not. There's nothing in it that can be about rejecting the Jews. If all the speakers and all the writers are identifying themselves and as part of the Jewish people, whatever the bitterness and nastiness of the arguments. So, yeah.
I see here in the chat a question from Michael Azar to everyone. Is Melito that different from John's non-supersessionist inner Jewish debate if he himself is Jewish and never speaks of the Jews, but only second person references to Israel? Is that something you would like to comment on, Daniel?
I didn't quite understand. Melito is manifestly not Jewish, as far as I know.
Yeah. And I think the question is, so if he were,
if he were, then he would have been a different person. He would have written a different poem. I don't know. That's a kind of counterfactual. By the way, I love Melito. I love reading it. I think it's one of the most magnificent pieces of rhetoric. In fact, I once said to a group of Protestant ministers that I was teaching in Vancouver, I said, sometimes I'm really glad to be Jewish. And they said, what do you mean sometimes? What are you talking about? I say, I get to enjoy Melito of Sardis. I don't have to feel guilty about it. You do. So, but I do think that shift of identification of subject position inside or outside of the people Israel makes an enormous difference in perception of the controversies of in the New Testament, when they get shifted from being one group of Jews arguing with another group of Jews to Jesus as the new thing, rejecting the old is a parallel or modeled on the situation of the Gentiles who have joined this project.
There is also a question here to Daniel Boyarin from Jack Mile. Do you
Oh,
believe that
yes,
the
absolutely.
yes?
I'm convinced that every author of all of the documents that are called the New Testament was a Jew and identified as a Jew.
Angela, do you see more hands? I don't think I have that.
Jesper, I see Michael Azar has his hand raised and Mark Nanos. I
Mark
think that's the
Nanos.
order. Is that the
Mark was
Oh,
first.
Mark was first. Okay, yes. In my screen, Michael's on the left side of Mark. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, yes, thank you. Let me say, first of all, how much I enjoyed all these papers and conference. Thank you very much. I'd like to come in on something Daniel's saying, going back to an earlier conversation about Paul. The question of Paul and temple and issue of sin being so central and Jesus satisfying that, that can similarly be, excuse me, qualified intertextually. If we understand that Paul is writing to non-Jews and he's enculturating them into a Jewish way of life, they're learning what sin is, but they don't have the solution Jews have. And so his need to explain not only what sin is and how it's affecting them and what righteousness would look like from a Jewish point of view in a Jewish culture they're entering, but also how they can resolve this. Since he doesn't allow them to become Jews, they're not under Torah, they don't have temple, their solution is Jesus. So in the same way that I see Daniel is, and many papers have, exploring how we can recontextualize this polemic or rhetorical emphasis, I think Paul can be understood similarly. Thank you again.
Thank you. And then one more question. We have time for one more question.
You have Michael Azar.
Yes, please.
I don't know if someone else would like to go because mine was sort of a follow-up from one that kind of got addressed, but I'd be happy to keep going. It was about, I guess, Daniel Boyarin's comments in regard to Melito. Most Melito scholars that I know in recent years have, in fact, argued that he was from a Jewish background in Sardis. And I'm always struck by him because he's so distinctly Johannine in so many ways, and not with not necessarily in reference to the gospel, but at least the stream influenced by John, and in his rejection of what you might call more Gentile practices in regard to Passover. So I'm very struck, on including him, how he differs, I guess, from John's gospel in that regard. And maybe we could add Justin Martyr, since that was the other name mentioned, if he is, from Samaritan lands, how that adds a unique dimension to it.
Well, I see that I'm not up on Melito scholarship. I last involved myself in Melito scholarship, I think 25 years ago, and he's changed apparently. So I'll take that under advisement and think, there is certainly an enormous difference between the Johannine understanding of Jesus as a Passover, as the Lamb of God, and Melito's charge of deicide. That's certain. Whether I can so easily ascribe it to differences in their cultural, ethnic, religious background, perhaps not. And
I see.
Mark Manos completely.
I see now that time is out, unfortunately. It's 4:30 and it's in Boston, slightly later in Sweden, and it's time to wrap things up. And I've been thinking what to say towards the end of this rich and very stimulating two-day conference. In the first paper today, I heard the expression that Mark interprets history through the lens of Daniel. And when I've listened to the papers, I was struck that so many of you were, your name is Daniel. So we have seen, we've read, we have understood, we've listened and learned so much through the lens of Daniel's, and to all the others, be your name Daniel or not, I would like to forward our profound thanks for all these rich, stimulating presentations. For those who have shared the sessions, reading the papers, of course, facilitating the conference, and also now responding to the papers. And I also thought of Dieter's presentation today on the motif of the transfiguration. In Western Christianity, the emphasis has been so much on the metamorphosis of the Christ in that text. But when I learned more about, during my years in Jerusalem, about the Eastern Christian interpretation, I understood that there, in that tradition, it's much more the metamorphosis of the disciples, that the Christ remains the same before and after and at Beit Tavor, but something happens there with the disciples. And I think whether we are disciples or not, in this respect, we could identify with this, that we change when we read these texts and when we listen to and learn from each other. And that is what scholarship is all about. So I'm immensely grateful to Boston College for hosting this, to my colleagues Ruth Langer and Camille Markey. And I thought that, Camille, if it's possible for you to show the picture, the photo. This is a painting by Caspar David Friedrich, who's actually born in Sweden, I learned a couple of days ago, because Greifswald belonged to Sweden in those days, painted in 1818, and it's called the Wanderer über dem Nebelmeer. Wanderer in German is both a hiker, and that is what we see there, and also a wanderer, someone who walks. And I think of these 2 days very much of a peripatetic school, that we walk and we learn, and religious is not only a way of talking, but also a way of walking. So thanks to each and every one of you for reading, listening, attending the conference. And if there's something you would like to add, Ruth, then I hand over the microphone to you.
I just want to say thank you so much to you, Jesper, for organizing what's been an exceptional conference. I think that there's been enormous focus and a narrow focus, and at the same time, a real breadth in terms of approaches to the focus, which was opening my eyes, opening my brain, challenging, and really pointing some new directions for what's the important work that needs to be done going forward. So this was the ideal of what a Corcoran Chair Conference ought to be doing. And I thank you so much for bringing it together. I thank so much all the speakers and all those who have joined us from as far away as Israel. I don't think there's anybody further away than that, but geographically, but those of you who are in European time are also staying up very late at night, and we much appreciate your presence and your taking part in this. And that includes you, Jesper. So we look forward to another Corcoran Chair Conference next year, also hosted by Jesper. So the sequel will be probably somewhat different, but we look forward to something of equivalent quality going forward. The talks have been recorded, so if you know people who missed them, or if you want to listen to them again, they will be up on our center's website after they've been processed. That will take a few days at least.